In this video, we share a shocking and moving story where acts of kindness and bravery become an inspiration for everyone. From an unexpected confrontation on a plane to the transformative power of compassion and empathy, this true story will make you reflect on the impact of our actions on the lives of others. Stay until the end, because not only will you discover how this story changes hearts and minds, but you will also understand why it is so important to recognize the humanity in each of us, regardless of our differences. Sergeant Leah Matthews held her boarding pass as her tired eyes scanned the bustling airport terminal. After 6 exhausting months in Afghanistan, she was finally on her way home. The weight of her experiences rested on her shoulders, but a small smile formed on her lips at the thought of seeing her family again. Now boarding first class for Flight 237 to Chicago, announced a voice over the speakers. Leah blinked in surprise. First class? She checked her ticket again, confirming that, indeed, she had a seat in first class. It must be a mistake or an upgrade, but she wasn't willing to question her luck. As she walked down the boarding bridge, Leah's military boots echoed against the walls. She boarded the plane, and the familiar smell of recycled air filled her nostrils. The first-class cabin gleamed with polished surfaces and luxurious seats. "Welcome aboard, ma'am," greeted the flight attendant kindly. "Your seat is 2A, right to your left." Leah thanked her and made her way to her assigned seat. She stored her small backpack in the overhead compartment and sank into the comfortable chair, enjoying the extra legroom. It was a stark contrast to the narrow military transports she had grown accustomed to. As other passengers boarded, Leah closed her eyes, allowing herself a moment of peace. The soft murmur of conversations and the noise of luggage filled the cabin. "Excuse me," a sharp voice interrupted her moment of tranquility. "I think you're in my seat." Leah opened her eyes abruptly. A well-dressed man in his 50s stood in the aisle, his lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. His gaze scanned her uniform, stopping at the sergeant insignias on her sleeve. "I'm sorry, sir, but this is my assigned seat," Leah replied, maintaining a firm and professional tone. She extended her boarding pass to verify. The man's frown deepened. "There must be some mistake. This is first class," he said, making the implication clear in his tone. Leah felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. She had faced that kind of prejudice before, but it was never easy. "I understand, sir," she responded, handing him her boarding pass. "As you can see, I have seat 2A assigned to me." The man snatched the ticket and examined it with narrowed eyes. A flight attendant approached, wearing a professional and unflappable smile. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, looking between Leah and the man. "Yes, there certainly is," the man replied, his voice rising. "This person claims to have a first-class ticket. There must be some error." The flight attendant looked at Leah's boarding pass. "Everything appears to be in order, sir. Sergeant Matthews is assigned seat 2A. The man's face flushed with anger. "This is unacceptable. I paid good money for a first-class ticket, and I won't let my flight be ruined by—" "Sir," the flight attendant interrupted firmly, "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. Sergeant Matthews has a valid first-class ticket and every right to be here. Now, if you could find your seat, we'll prepare for takeoff." The man huffed, giving Leah one last look of disdain before walking back to his seat. Leah took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She felt the eyes of other passengers on her, a mix of curiosity and discomfort. The flight attendant turned to Leah, her expression softening. "I'm very sorry about that, Sergeant. Can I offer you anything before we take off?" Leah shook her head. "No, thank you, I'm fine." As the plane taxied toward the runway, Leah looked out the window, her mind replaying the confrontation she had just experienced. She had faced danger and death in Afghanistan, but somehow, this encounter left her more affected than any firefight. The engines roared to life, and the plane lifted into the air. Leah watched the ground fall away, the city streets giving way to a sea of clouds. She thought of her home, her family waiting for her, and the man who had questioned her right to sit where she was. When the seatbelt sign turned off, Leah reached for her backpack. She pulled out a small notebook and a pen, an idea forming in her mind. Maybe there was a way to turn that unpleasant situation into something positive. She began to write, her pen moving quickly across the page. "Dear Sir," she started, then paused, carefully considering her words. This wasn't about anger or revenge. It was about understanding. As Leah wrote, she didn't notice the man from earlier watching her from the other side of the aisle, his expression a mix of shame and curiosity. The flight attendant approached Leah's seat with a gentle smile on her face. "Sergeant Matthews," she said softly, "I couldn't help but notice you're writing something. May I ask what it is?" Leah looked up, surprised by the interruption. She hesitated for a moment before responding. It's a letter to the gentleman who questioned my seat earlier." The flight attendant's eyebrows raised in surprise. "A letter? That's certainly unexpected. May I ask why?" Leah looked at her notebook and then back at the flight attendant. "I believe there's always room for understanding, even in difficult situations. I thought that maybe if I shared a bit of my story, it might help bridge the gap." The flight attendant's eyes widened with interest. "That's incredibly thoughtful of you, Sergeant. Would you mind sharing a bit of what you've written?" Leah hesitated, then nodded. "Well, I started by explaining who I am and why I'm on this flight. I thought it might help you understand." As Leah began to read her letter, the plane hit a turbulence zone. The seatbelt sign lit up, and the flight attendant quickly apologized to check on other passengers. The turbulence intensified, causing the plane to shake and tremble. Passengers grabbed their armrests tightly, filled with concern. Leah remained calm, her military training kicking in. She noticed an elderly woman across the aisle, particularly distressed. "Everything is fine, ma'am," Leah said in a reassuring tone. "Turbulence is normal. Just take a deep breath." The woman approached gratefully, her white knuckles gripping her seat. Leah continued to offer words of comfort in a low voice, not only to the woman but also to the anxious passengers around her. When the plane stabilized, Leah exchanged glances with the man who had confronted her earlier. He was watching her with a mixture of surprise and reluctant respect. Leah offered a slight smile before returning to her notebook. She resumed writing, pouring her thoughts onto the page. She wrote about her experiences in Afghanistan, the camaraderie she had found with fellow soldiers from all backgrounds, and the lessons she had learned about humanity amidst adversity. As she wrote, memories flooded her. She recalled her first day of basic training, standing in lines with men and women from all walks of life, all united by their desire to serve. She thought of her best friend, Maria, a Latina woman from Texas who had saved her life during an ambush on the outskirts of Kabul. Leah paused, considering how to convey those experiences. She wanted the man to understand that the uniform she wore represented not just her own service, but the sacrifices of many others from all corners of America. Lost in her thoughts, Leah didn't notice the flight attendant approaching with a beverage cart until she spoke. "Would you like something to drink, Sergeant?" Leah looked up, blinking as she returned to the present. "Oh, just water, please." As the flight attendant served her the drink, she glanced at Leah's notebook. "Still working on that letter?" Leah nodded. "Yes, I am. It's proving to be more challenging than I expected." The flight attendant smiled understandingly. "Sometimes, the most important things are the hardest to express. But I'm sure your sincerity will be noticed." As she moved to the next passenger, Leah took a sip of her water and returned to her writing. She described the pride she felt wearing her uniform, not just for herself, but for all those who had come before her and broken down barriers. Time seemed to fly as Leah poured her heart onto the page. Before she knew it, the captain's voice came over the speakers, announcing their descent into Chicago. Leah finished her letter with a simple invitation to dialogue and understanding. She signed her name at the end, then carefully folded the pages and placed them in an envelope she had obtained from the flight attendant. As the plane began its descent, Leah felt a slight tap on her shoulder. She turned to find the elderly woman she had comforted during the turbulence smiling warmly at her. "I just wanted to thank you," the woman said softly. "Your kindness meant a lot to me. Are you going home?" Leah nodded, returning the smile. "Yes, after 6 months away, I can't wait to see my family." The woman's eyes softened. "Well, I'm sure they'll be thrilled to have you back. Thank you for your service, dear." As they continued chatting, Leah noticed the man who had confronted her earlier watching their interaction from the other side of the aisle. His expression was inscrutable, but there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, perhaps a hint of curiosity or even remorse. The plane landed smoothly and began to taxi to the gate. As passengers stood to collect their belongings, Leah took a deep breath and stood up as well. She held the envelope containing her letter, summoning the courage to approach the man's seat just as he was retrieving his luggage from the overhead compartment. He tensed at the sight of her. "Excuse me, sir," Leah said firmly. "I wanted to give you this." She handed him the envelope. The man hesitated, confusion replacing his initial defensive posture. "What is it?" he asked gruffly. "It's a letter," Leo explained. "I thought it might help explain some things. You don't have to read it now, but I hope you do when you have a moment." The man looked at the envelope for a long moment before slowly extending his hand to take it. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough but lacking the previous hostility. As passengers began to exit the plane, the man cleared his throat. "Sergeant," he began quietly, "I think I owe you an apology." Leah raised an eyebrow, surprised by the unexpected turn of events. "Sir," the man shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. "My behavior earlier was unacceptable. I made assumptions I shouldn't have made." Leah nodded, acknowledging his words. "Thank you for saying that. Admitting our mistakes takes courage." Finally, the man looked her in the eyes, a hint of respect in his gaze. "It seems I have a lot to learn. I lost my brother in Afghanistan 2 years ago. He was also a soldier." The revelation hung in the air between them, creating a shared understanding of loss and sacrifice that had previously seemed unreachable. As they made their way to the exit, the man turned to Leah one last time. "Sergeant Matthews," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "welcome home." Leah felt a lump form in her throat as she exited the plane and entered the bustling terminal. The encounter had left her with a mix of emotions: hope, sadness, and a renewed sense of purpose. As she walked through the airport, Leah couldn't help but reflect on the unexpected turn of events. She had boarded the plane expecting a quiet journey home, and instead found herself in the midst of a profound human interaction. Lost in her thoughts, she barely heard the sound of hurried footsteps behind her. A voice called out, slightly out of breath, "Sergeant Matthews, wait." Leah turned around, surprised to see the man from the plane approaching quickly, his handbag awkwardly bouncing by his side. "I'm glad I caught up with you," he said as he reached her. "I read your letter." Leah's eyebrows raised in surprise. "You already read it? I didn't expect that." The man smiled, a mix of emotions on his face. "I couldn't wait. Your words, they really reached me. I realize now how narrow-minded I was." Leah looked at him attentively, seeing genuine remorse in his eyes. "I appreciate you saying that. It's not easy to confront our own prejudices." "No, it's not," he admitted, running a hand through his graying hair. "But it's necessary. Your letter made me see things from a different perspective. I'd like to invite you for a coffee if you have time," the man continued, a hint of shyness in his voice. "I have some questions if you're willing to talk." Leah hesitated, looking at her watch. Her family hadn't arrived at the airport yet due to traffic in Chicago, so she had some time. After a moment's thought, she nodded. "All right, I have some time." They walked to a small cafe in the terminal, the bustle of travelers creating a background of white noise. They settled at a small table with their drinks. The man extended his hand. "I'm David Carlson. I didn't properly introduce myself on the plane." Leah shook his hand firmly. "Sergeant Leah Matthews. Pleasure to meet you, David." An awkward pause settled between them as they sipped their coffee. David seemed to be gathering his thoughts, his fingers nervously drumming on the table. Finally, he spoke. "In your letter, you mentioned your experiences in Afghanistan. My brother, Jack, was also stationed there. He didn't make it back." Leah's expression softened. "I'm so sorry for your loss, David. Losing a fellow soldier is incredibly tough, but I can't imagine losing a brother." David nodded, his gaze distant. "It's been 2 years," but some days it feels like yesterday. When I saw you on the plane, I think I felt anger that you were coming back when Jack wasn't."
Leah leaned in gently.
"That's understandable, David. Pain sometimes makes us react in unexpected ways. But that doesn't excuse how I treated you," David insisted. "Your letter made me realize how much Jack would have disapproved of my behavior. He always believed in equality, in judging people by their actions, not their appearances." As David spoke, Leah could see the pain and regret etched on his face. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. "This is my group in Afghanistan," she said, sliding the photo across the table. David took the photograph and looked at the soldiers' faces, men and women of diverse races and backgrounds, all together, arms around each other's shoulders, dusty and tired but smiling. "The woman next to me is Maria," Leah explained. "She saved my life during an ambush. The guy at the end is Ahmed, our interpreter. He risked everything to help us. We came from different worlds, but none of that mattered. We were a family." David traced the faces in the photo with his finger, his expression thoughtful. "Jack used to say something similar in his letters. I guess I never really understood until now." As they continued talking, Leah shared more stories from her deployment. She told David about the local children they helped, the schools they protected, and the bonds formed with other soldiers. With each story, she could see David's preconceived notions slowly unraveling. "You know," David said after a while, "I've spent the last 2 years angry at the world, blaming everyone for Jack's death. But listening to you, I realize I've been dishonoring his memory." Leah leaned forward, her voice full of sincerity. "Your brother gave his life serving his country. The best way to honor him is to live by the values he fought for: equality, justice, and compassion." David nodded, discreetly wiping his eyes. "You're right. Jack would want me to be better, to strive to be better." As the conversation came to an end, David pulled a card from his briefcase and handed it to Leah. "I run a support group for veterans," he explained. "We focus on helping soldiers readjust to civilian life. It would be an honor if you consider joining us someday." Leah took the card, smiling. "I'd like that, David. Thank you." When they stood to say goodbye, David leaned in and gave her a brief hug. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant Matthews. And thank you for opening my eyes today." Leah returned the hug, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. What had started as an unpleasant confrontation had transformed into a moment of true human connection. As they headed their separate ways, Leah couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. If this conversation could bridge the gap between her and David, perhaps there was hope to heal even larger divisions in society. Leah made her way to the baggage claim area, her mind still processing the day's events. As she waited for her bag to appear on the conveyor belt, she noticed a small girl staring at her with wide eyes. The girl, no more than 7 or 8 years old, was tugging at her mother's sleeve, pointing at Leah. "Mom, look, she's a soldier," the girl exclaimed excitedly. The mother smiled apologetically at Leah. "I'm sorry, she's just excited. She wants to be a soldier when she grows up." Leah crouched down to the girl's level, feeling warmth in her heart at the little one's enthusiasm. "Really? Well, it's a great job, and I'm sure you'd be amazing at it." The girl beamed, her eyes shining. "Did you fight the bad guys? Were you scared?" Leah let out a soft laugh. "Sometimes I was scared, yes. But being brave doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It means doing the right thing, even when you're scared." The girl nodded solemnly, absorbing Leah's words. The mother watched the interaction with a mix of gratitude and admiration. "Thank you for your service," she said softly, "and thank you for taking the time to talk with her. It means a lot." Leah stood up, offering a warm smile. "It's my pleasure. Your daughter reminds me why I do what I do." As the family walked away, Leah saw her bag appear on the conveyor belt. She lifted it onto her shoulder, feeling the familiar weight that, at that moment, was comforting. She headed toward the exit, her heart light after an emotional roller coaster throughout the day. Her home was just beyond those doors. Her family, her bed, the life she had put on hold for 6 months, everything awaited. Stepping through the sliding doors into the warm Chicago evening, Leah took a deep breath. The air smelled different there, a scent of home, of freedom, of possibility. She looked among the crowd of people waiting for their loved ones and then saw them, her parents and her younger brother, all holding a large welcome sign decorated with American flags. Leah felt tears prick at her eyes as she quickened her pace toward them. Her mother was the first to see her, letting out a cry of joy and running toward her. In seconds, Leah found herself enveloped in a group hug, surrounded by her family's love and warmth. As they hugged her, Leah felt all the tension dissolve. She was home. She was safe, and despite the challenges she had faced both on the battlefield and on the plane, she knew that compassion and understanding could bridge even the widest gaps. Her father pulled away slightly, his eyes shining with pride. "Welcome home, sweetheart. We've missed you so much." Leah moved, felt her heart swell. "I've missed you all too, Dad. More than you know." As they walked to the car, her family bombarded her with questions about the flight and her time in service. Leah hesitated, unsure how to explain the unexpected encounter with David. Her mother, always perceptive, noticed her hesitation. "Is everything okay, sweetheart? Did something happen on the flight?" her mother asked, her brow furrowed with concern. Leah took a deep breath, considering her words carefully. "Actually, Mom, something did happen, something unexpected." Her mother frowned, visibly worried. "What do you mean, honey? Were there problems on the plane?" Leah shook her head, offering a small smile. "No, it wasn't exactly a problem. It's a bit of a long story." Her father intervened, placing an arm around her shoulders. "We have plenty of time, honey. Why don't you tell us on the way home?" Already in the car, with Leah sitting in the back seat next to her younger brother, she began to recount the events of the flight. Her family listened attentively, their expressions shifting from concern to surprise and then to pride as she described her encounter with David and the letter she had written. "Oh, Leah," her mother said, turning in her seat to look at her. "I'm so proud of how you handled that situation. It must have been tough." Leah shrugged, feeling a mix of emotions. "At first, it wasn't easy. But then I remembered something my commanding officer always said. The greatest victories aren't won on the battlefield, but in people's hearts and minds." Her younger brother, Tyler, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "So, did you punch the guys?" "Tyler," her mother exclaimed, scolding him, but Leah just laughed. "No, little brother, I didn't hit him. Sometimes, words are more powerful than fists." As they drove through the familiar streets of their hometown, Leah saw everything with new eyes. The local cafe, where she had spent so many hours with her high school friends, the park where she learned to ride a bike, the recruitment office where she first studied to join the army. Everything felt comforting, and at the same time strangely new. "We kept your room just the way you left it," her father commented, looking at her through the rear-view mirror. "Though your mother probably dusted it a bit." Leah, moved, felt grateful for the familiarity of it all. After months of military discipline and the intensity of deployment, the idea of her childhood room was incredibly appealing. When they arrived at their home, Leah felt a lump form in her throat. A sign hung on the porch that read, "Welcome home, Sergeant Matthews," with red, white, and blue balloons gently swaying in the breeze. "Surprise!" her family shouted as they exited the car. Leah blinked, holding back tears, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. She walked down the familiar path to the door, memories flooding her mind, running down that same trail as a child, leaving filled with excitement and fear the day she departed for basic training, and tearful goodbyes before each deployment. Inside the house, the aroma of homemade food and the soft scent of her mother's favorite candles filled the air. Leah placed her bag by the door and took a deep breath, letting the familiarity of the surroundings envelop her. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" her mother asked, already heading to the kitchen. "I made all your favorite dishes." Leah's stomach growled in response, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the modest meal on the plane. "I'm starving," she admitted with a smile. As they sat around the dining table with plates full of comforting food, Leah felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. The simple act of sharing a meal with her family, something she had dreamed of during long nights in Afghanistan, felt almost surreal. Between bites of her mother's famous roast, Leah began to share stories from her deployment. She told them about the friends she made, the challenges she faced, and the moments of unexpected beauty she found in a war-torn land. Her family listened attentively, asking questions and offering words of support. Even Tyler, usually more interested in video games than family conversations, seemed captivated by his sister's stories. As the meal came to an end, Leah's father cleared his throat, a serious expression on his face. "Leah, sweetheart, there's something we need to talk about." Leah felt a pang of concern. "What's this about, Dad?" He exchanged a glance with her mother before continuing. "Well, remember Mr. Johnson from the street? He runs a security company, and he approached us a few weeks ago." Her father paused, searching for the right words. "He's looking to hire veterans for his company, and he specifically asked about you. He said it would be an honor to have you on his team."
Leah blinked, surprised.
"But I just got home, and he hasn't even decided if I want to re-enlist or not." Her mother reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "We know, honey. We don't want to pressure you. We just wanted you to know that there are opportunities here if you decide to stay home permanently." Leah took a deep breath, her mind overwhelmed by the possibilities. The idea of a stable job close to home was tempting, but so was the idea of continuing her military career. She had worked hard to reach the rank of sergeant and still felt she had much to contribute. "Thank you for telling me," she finally replied. "I'll definitely think about it." After dinner, they moved to the living room, where the conversation continued in a more relaxed tone. Leah, still absorbed in her thoughts about the day's events, asked for a moment alone and stepped out to the back porch, needing a moment of tranquility. The sun was setting, painting the sky with bright shades of orange and pink. Leah leaned against the railing, letting the evening's silence envelop her. After a few minutes, she heard the sound of the screen door opening behind her. Her mother stepped out and draped a warm sweater over her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. Leah moved, grateful for her mother's intuition. "Just everything. It's a lot to take in." Her mother nodded, staying by her side as they watched the sunset. "You've been through so much, seen things we can't even begin to understand." They remained silent for a few moments before her mother spoke again. "You know, when you told us you were joining the army, I was terrified. I didn't want my little girl to be in danger." Leah turned to look at her mother, seeing a mix of pride and concern in her eyes. "But seeing you today," her mother continued, "hearing how you handled that situation on the plane, I realized something. You're no longer just my little one. You're a strong and compassionate woman making a real difference in the world." Leah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she hugged her mother tightly. "Thank you, Mom. That means more than you know." As they embraced, Leah began to feel a clarity settling within her. Although the path ahead wasn't entirely clear, she knew she had the strength and support to face any challenge. The screen door opened again, and Tyler peeked his head out. "Hey, sis, someone's here to see you," he said with curiosity in his voice. Leah and her mother exchanged an intrigued glance and returned inside the house. As they entered the living room, Leah stopped in surprise. There, at the entrance, standing and somewhat awkward, was David, the man from the plane. "I hope you don't mind," David said, his voice hesitant. "I found your address in the envelope you gave me. I wanted to talk to you again, if that's okay." Leah's family looked between her and David, a mix of confusion and curiosity on their faces. Leah took a deep breath, understanding that this unexpected visit could be the perfect opportunity to connect two important parts of her life. "Family," she said firmly, "this is David. We met today on the plane, and I think we both have a story to share." The tension in the room was palpable as Leah's family watched David with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Her father stepped forward and extended his hand. "Welcome to our home, David. I'm John, Leah's father." David shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for having me, sir. I apologize for the intrusion." Leah's mother, always the gracious host, quickly invited them to sit and offered him something to drink. "Would you like something to drink, David? Coffee? Tea?" "Just water, please," David replied, not taking his eyes off Leah. Once everyone was comfortable, Leah took a deep breath. "I suppose I should explain," she began, looking at her family. "David and I had a difficult start on the plane, but something important happened, something I think is worth sharing." Over the next hour, Leah and David recounted the events of the flight. They talked about the initial confrontation, the letter Leah had written, and the transformation that had occurred. David, his voice laden with emotion, shared about his brother Jack and how Leah's words had made him confront his own prejudices. Leah's family listened in silence, their expressions shifting from surprise to understanding and then to admiration. When David finished speaking, there was a moment of profound silence. Tyler, who had been unusually quiet, was the first to break it. "So, you were an asshole to my sister, but now you're not, right?" Tyler said bluntly. "Tyler," her mother exclaimed, scolding him, but David raised a hand. "No, he's right," David admitted with a somewhat embarrassed smile. "I was an asshole, much more than that, actually. But your sister, she showed me a better way." John leaned forward, his expression serious. "What you did initially was wrong, David, but coming here, admitting your mistakes, that takes courage." David nodded, gratitude reflected in his eyes.
Thank you, sir.
"I'm trying to improve, to be a better person." Leah's letter made me realize how much harm I was causing, not just to others, but to myself as well. Leah's mother, who had returned with the drinks, intervened. Leah has always had the gift of bringing out the best in people. Even as a child, she was always the peacemaker among her friends. Leah felt a slight blush on her cheeks. "Mom, it's true," her father added. "Remember when you convinced the Thompson kids to stop bothering the new kid at school? You organized a whole welcome committee for him." As her family shared more anecdotes, Leah felt a comforting warmth fill her chest. She had been so focused on her army experiences that she had almost forgotten the person she was before, the girl who always defended others and believed in the power of kindness to change hearts. David listened to these stories attentively, looking at Leah with a mix of admiration and remorse. When there was a pause in the conversation, he cleared his throat and spoke softly. "I can't change what I did on the plane," he said firmly but gently. "But I can change what I do from now on. Leah, what I said about the Veterans Support Group, I was serious. It would be an honor to have you with us, to share your experiences and knowledge." Leah was thoughtful. "I'd like that, David. Thank you." As the evening progressed, the initial tension in the room dissipated. David shared more memories of his brother Jack, telling stories that made the whole family laugh and cry. Leah began to see David in a new light, not just as the man who had confronted her on the plane, but as a grieving brother trying to find his way back to peace. When David finally stood to leave, the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. John shook his hand warmly, and even Tyler gave him an approving nod. At the door, David turned to Leah one last time.
Thank you, he said simply.
For everything, Leah smiled, feeling a sense of closure within herself.
Take care, David.
See you at the support group. As David left the house, Leah's family gathered around her. Her mother hugged her tightly. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so proud of you. Her father nodded, a proud expression on his face. You handled that situation with grace and wisdom beyond your years. Leah felt tears welling up at her eyes, overwhelmed by the love and support surrounding her. I just did what I felt was right, she replied softly. Tyler, always the joker, gave her a gentle tap on the arm. You're pretty awesome for being my big sister, he admitted, though somewhat reluctantly. Leah laughed, tousling his hair. Thanks, little guy. As the family settled back into the living room, a comfortable silence filled the space. Leah looked around, reflecting on the series of events that had led her to this moment. From the battlefields of Afghanistan to a confrontation on a plane and now, a quiet night at home with her family. Everything seemed interconnected in some way, part of a larger journey. Her mother's voice broke through her thoughts. Leah, sweetheart, what are you thinking about regarding the job offer? Leah took a deep breath, considering her words carefully. I'm not sure yet, she admitted. Part of me wants to stay here, close to you all. But another part feels the call to keep serving. Her father approached with understanding. After everything you've experienced today, I feel like you still have so much to do. Many barriers to break down, bridges to build. Her mother gave her a squeeze on the hand. Whatever you decide, we're here to support you. You know that, right? Leah nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude. I know, and that means everything to me. That night, as Leah settled into her childhood bed, surrounded by the sounds and familiar memories of home, she felt a deep sense of peace. The day had been filled with unexpected challenges and profound revelations, but through it all, she had managed to stay true to herself and her values. As she closed her eyes, Leah's last thoughts revolved around the letter she had written to David. Those words, born from a place of pain and hope, had sparked a transformation she could never have anticipated. It was a powerful reminder that even in the face of prejudice and misunderstanding, compassion and courage could pave the way for change. In the stillness of the night, with the weight of her experiences enveloping her like a familiar blanket, Sergeant Leah Matthews of the United States Army, daughter, sister, and bridge builder, smiled. Tomorrow would be a new day, full of possibilities and potential, and she was ready to face it head-on. The next morning, Leah woke up early, still with her military habits deeply ingrained. She went downstairs and found her father already at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in hand and reading the morning newspaper. "Good morning, Dad," Leah greeted, pouring herself a cup of coffee. He looked up and smiled warmly. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" Leah nodded as she settled into a chair across from him. "Yes, actually. And I think I've made a decision about what I want to do." Her father put down the newspaper and looked at her with interest. "Oh, do you want to share it?" Taking a deep breath, Leah began to explain the plan she had formed in her mind overnight. She talked about her desire to combine her military experience with her newfound passion for building bridges of understanding and closing gaps. She mentioned the possibility of working with the veteran support group David had mentioned, but also her intention to reach out to schools and community organizations to share her experiences and foster dialogue. As she spoke, her father's smile widened. When she finished, he leaned forward and took her hand. "Leah, I couldn't be prouder of you. You've taken everything life has thrown at you and turned it into something beautiful and meaningful." Leah felt tears fill her eyes.
Thank you, Dad.
That means so much to me. Over the next few weeks, Leah immersed herself in realizing her vision. She reached out to David, and together they worked to expand the activities of a veteran support group. They organized discussion panels, bringing together veterans from diverse backgrounds to share their experiences with the community. Leah also contacted her old high school, offering to speak to students about her experiences, both in the Army and how she had handled difficult conversations like the one she had with David. Her talks quickly became popular, and other schools in the area began inviting her to share her story. As her work gained recognition, Leah started receiving invitations to speak at community events, local government meetings, and even a regional conference on diversity and inclusion. Each time she shared her story, she could see the impact it had on people, how it opened their eyes and hearts to new perspectives. One sunny afternoon, about 2 months after returning home, Leah found herself standing on the podium of a local community center. The room was filled with people from all walks of life: veterans, students, community leaders, and ordinary citizens. Looking out at the crowd, Leah felt a surge of emotion. She saw David in the front row, nodding encouragingly. Her family was nearby, their faces beaming with pride. And among the audience, there were familiar faces, people whose lives she had touched and whose perspectives she had helped change. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice strong and clear. "My name is Leah Matthews, and I'm here to talk to you about bridges. Not the ones that span rivers or canyons, but the ones that connect hearts and minds." As she shared her story, from her experiences in Afghanistan to that flight with David, Leah could see the impact of her words on the audience, how they leaned forward in their seats, nodding in understanding or discreetly wiping away tears. "Each of us has the power to build these bridges," she concluded. "It starts with the willingness to listen, to try to understand perspectives different from our own. It's not always easy, but I promise you it's worth it. Because when we build these bridges, We create a world where understanding replaces fear, where compassion overcomes prejudice, and where we recognize the humanity in each of us, no matter our differences. As applause filled the room, Leah felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was her new mission, her way of continuing to serve, even outside the uniform. She was building bridges, one dialogue at a time. That night, as Leah sat on her backyard porch watching the sunset, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to that moment. From the battlefields of Afghanistan, through a confrontation on a plane, to quiet evenings at home with her family. Everything seemed interconnected, part of a larger purpose. Her phone buzzed with a text message from David. "Great speech today." Jack would have been proud. Leah smiled, feeling a warm flutter in her chest. She thought of all the lives she had touched, the minds she had helped open, and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. As the last rays of sun painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, Leah Matthews, bridge builder and peacemaker, took a deep breath. The path ahead was now clear, filled with purpose and possibilities. She was ready to face any challenge, armed with compassion, courage, and an unwavering belief in the power of understanding to change the world. The porch door opened behind her, and she turned to see her entire family coming out. Her mother was carrying a tray of lemonade, while her father and Tyler set up a few chairs. "We could use some company," her father said with a smile. As they settled, sharing stories and laughter with the fading daylight in the background, Leah felt a profound sense of peace. This was her home, not just the physical place, but the love and support surrounding her. It was the foundation from which she could reach out to the world, build bridges, and create change. The future stretched out before her, full of promise and potential. And Leah Matthews was ready to face it head-on, one conversation, one bridge, and one transformed heart at a time. If this video has helped you connect more with yourself and inspired you on your growth journey, take action and subscribe to the Vidasto Inspiration channel to discover more stories that will fill you with motivation and hope. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment telling me how this story has impacted your life or what reflections it has left you with. And if you think this message can inspire someone you know, share it with your friends so they too can find inspiration and purpose in their lives.